Okay, so this brings us to an interesting, kind of cornerstone in our first engineering summit, and we'll be talking about full stack development, something that's pretty close to my heart and to a lot of us on the call here. We have on the panel, we have Sudan, who is our data lead globally, and we have Raja, who is one of our senior most technologists in the financial services space, and there is Ravi Ivani, who did a session right before, an amazing session on reusability. So this is the panel. We would want to get into the aspects around full stack development. There's a lot of myths and a lot of buzzwords around full stack development. A lot of blogs going around. People believing that I get a full stack engineer and all my problems are going to be solved for the rest of my life. So we want to clear those myths and want to specifically talk about areas, for example, in case of data, in case of financial services, retail, from where I come, QSR, TNH, in the context of what we do for our clients day in day out. What does full stack development mean, right? And how are we embracing that to bring success to ourselves and our clients? So to start with, I'll start with Sudan because it is one thing that has always intrigued me, and I think I'm only partially literate in this aspect, is what does full stack mean in the context of data, Sudan?
So I know you started by saying that full stack definition is challenging by itself, right? And extrapolating it for data is even more harder. So if I were to look at full stack, what does developer mean, right? Full stack of anything, it's two things broadly. One is an end-to-end understanding and skills related to it. Number two is the other best or the ways of working, right? The best practices and ways of working. So for a full stack developer, you typically talk about it as UI, middleware, backend, things around quality, testing, cloud, all the things that you need to you need to know to stay relevant. So in the context of data, last 2 years, I've been championing something called full stack data engineers and full stack data scientists. And I'll be very upfront with you, right? Not everybody buys into this idea, but I get beaten up quite a bit. But what does it really mean, right? So let's take data engineering as an example. So data engineering, of course, you need to know a language, just like Java, Scala, or Python, but we break it into a set of logical parts that you need to know to be successful. Like in our competencies, we look for data strategy, data governance, data design, integration and transformation, where language plays a role, testing frameworks, visualization, right, and cloud data services. Just that list is a huge long thing, right? Similarly, for data science, you saw the earlier presentation by Abhishek on the Bodhi platform. And a lot of what he talked about had nothing to do with model building, right? Similarly, for data science, the way we define it is model development, management, model management, build and deployment tools, ML ops, testing tools, and of course, cloud AI ML based services. So I would say, I think I like to say that, if you are a heart surgeon, right? You cannot say, what, I don't know about me, and I don't want to do MBBS, I want to directly do heart surgery, right? The same thing for a full stack, that is the breadth, correct? And then you still need the specialists for each of those areas. So whereas your depth is debatable, you can choose, but it's not like I'm not good at anything, but I'll be a generalist, right? So data engineering, we have people, experts in these different sub-segments within data engineering, science and analytics, but then there is a breadth around it.
Yep. No, no, absolutely, absolutely makes sense. And we are seeing that a lot in the context of retail as well, for example, right? So I'll get my turn a bit later, but I'll pass it on to Raja first, who comes from the financial services background. And Raja and I had a very interesting conversation the other day around how is he enabling full stack in FS. So Raja, why don't you go ahead and talk about how you're doing that in the FS world?
Thanks, Ravi. So when we started off, we earlier just concentrated on people knowing front end and people knowing back end. And then we started realizing that the flow would really require people to understand both. And then we started to realize that in order to be in the flow, you also need to know a bit of DevOps. You also need to know a bit of cloud because most of our clients were moving to cloud. So we expanded full stack to be somebody who has to know front end, who has to know back end, and who has to know DevOps and cloud. And then everything else, like Sudan was saying, is you don't need to be an expert in all of them, but you do need to be expert in at least one of them. And then you need to know enough. I see this as a flow. So if you have a team where there are only pockets of specialization and there is no flow, there is nobody gluing them together, then you see a drop in flow. So for example, if you are only a backend specialist, you feed in a story, but now you realize that you needed to troubleshoot a problem with its deployment to cloud. If you don't understand that, then the flow would break, the flow would stop, the speed at which the team would move ahead would stop, right? So for you to let the flow continue and let the work move as fast as possible and let the clients realize the value as fast as possible, you really need to have end-to-end breadth for the flow. And you don't probably need, what we discovered is we earlier pushed for 100% of the team to be full stack. And we realized maybe even that is an overkill because there are some people who are really deep on one area and they're really needed there. I'm sure Sudan would have seen that too on the data side. So what we arrived at was you need a majority of the people to be full stack, and then you need certain people to be deep specialists in certain areas, and for everybody on the team to be specialist in at least one area. That's the sort of happy mix in financial services that worked for us.
Well, perfect, perfect. Yeah, I mean, you're telling about this example where you have your backend developers now coding Flutter user experiences, whereby which now they're completely independent. So right from the user experience layer to the services and taking them on to production, they are responsible for the entire stack, whereby which they own the quality and they own the delivery of what they're doing, right? That way, it makes them much more independent to be able to release functionality at pace and also own the quality of what they're building end to end.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yes.
Ravi, in your experience, and I know at McDonald's, I mean, there was a significant bit of edge, physical, distributed computing that you dealt with, and with a different multiple archetypes of developers that you encountered. What's been your, kind of learning? Because it's pretty unique. I mean, there's a talk coming later from one of your accounts. So
Yep.
be keen to understand, what's your experience been.
You know, um, to me, I mean, being a full stack engineer, especially like in the context of digital transformation, right? It's about having the will and fearlessness to acquire the skills necessary to achieve an outcome in the fastest way possible, right? So, and to me, the meaning of full stack, it really starts sinking in like 3 years ago, um, when we began this digital transformation journey with this large travel and hospitality client. And we began helping them, transform their technology, across their channels, data platforms, services, marketing platforms. And we had to onboard hundreds of engineers across this diversity of work, right? So, with all of the transformation change happening at the same time, it was almost like a necessity for our engineers to go wider and deeper than the core programming skills that they came with when they first joined our team, right? So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. So one of the outcomes we were helping this large hospitality client was to enable their customers place orders via voice on their mobile channel. And we had a small squad of Android engineers on this effort. And they soon realized that they had to go broader than their skill set that they had at that time. So, for example, one of the aspects to the voice ordering is to integrate with an NLP engine, and each voice utterance could bring up a different API response depending on how the NLP engine understood the request, which was pretty unpredictable for a regular programmer, right? So, to get a better handle on this, the team actually had to learn how to train and configure the NLP engine so they could get a more predictable response. So, and they had to write DevOps scripts to on top of the NLP engine to make sure that the configuration got replicated across environments, right? And all of this has, by the way, has nothing to do with Android programming, right? And the other challenge here was, when you think about this, there's probably hundreds of thousands of ways you can order an item using voice, compared to touch, right? So the team needed to automate like this utterance generator that combine different possible ways to generate millions of combinations of utterances and to improve the usability of product. And again, this was nothing to do with Android programming. They used Python. They created this script that will generate speech out of text and so on. And the third thing around this was, they once this was built, they had to take this implementation to Google Home, which means they had to take the front end logic from Android into the back end services, and they had to learn Python to be able to do that. So basically, to me, this is a team of full stack engineers, right? So they did not stop or wait for someone else to come in to solve the problem that was slightly outside the boundaries of their core competency. So they had the willingness and fearless to learn these skills to achieve that outcome. So that's the way I kind of look at it, basically.
So that's a very pertinent point, right? Learning as is required and not getting bound by what we already know, and kind of branding ourselves as to a particular stack or to a particular way of dev, right?
Absolutely,
Uh,
absolutely.
right. So one of the things that I have seen in one of our accounts, where the client was always asking for full stack developers, right? And when we went deep into it, and this is probably what Raja was touching upon as well, is that we came up with archetypes of full stack developers, right? Because their user experience was so involved, stuff that they wanted to do on mobile, that they wanted to do on all user touch points. We saw that there is an archetype of a full stack, you can say experience developer, right? Who beyond the regular things of what they know on the client side are also able to traverse to Node.js microservices based on Node.js and the corresponding DevOps and QE part of it, right? Similarly, the microservices developers also, beyond the regular microservices aspects, would also learn the aspects around quality engineering, the aspects around DevOps, and aspects required for them to be fully independent, right? And exactly the same thing was true for the SRE engineers as well, right? Because when we formed the SRE team, it was an amalgam of people who came from application development side and people who came from infrastructure side, right? And both of them had their own sweet spots and shortcomings. And to Raja's point, we created what was an amalgam of people who could look at a Java stack trace and say, okay, what this is, and probably go and fix the code, and also look at Terraform and say, okay, fine, I can look at a .tf file and also make changes to it, right? And then there are those people who are like on the deep end of DevOps, and also there are people who are on the deep end of the coding world, where on the microservices world, that are the specialists, or the platform people, if you will. So one challenge that we had, right, which in this journey that I wanted to especially ask you folks if you have faced the same, is the whole aspect of building quality into the product, right? That the assumption that somebody else is going to do my QE or QA, right? So one of the philosophies that at least I'm trying to encourage very heavily, and it has been, honestly speaking, mixed success, is doing your own quality engineering and quality assurance. So I wanted to understand, I'll probably pick up Sudan, and then we can, like Raja and then Ravi, what's been your experience, and where do you think, you have faced challenges, and where have you seen success, and if there is any insights on that?
That's interesting. So I know I'm old enough to know QA, QE as a separate function and trying to make it part and parcel of what a developer needs to think about and do starting day one. We are actually in data, we are going one step further. We are saying none of us should actually be doing it. It should be part of even the systems. So in fact, one of the initiatives that we are doing right now, it's called data quality curation, data governance as part of AI and ML, right? So we are saying, okay, I mean, I agree with you in terms of developers. Obviously, TDD is all about, start with the quality and the outcome in mind, and then actually write the first line of code. In data, it's a bit tricky defining quality. In fact, I had this conversation with the CDO who said, I want Sapient to help me with the improving data quality. And I asked that lady, why do you want to improve quality? She said, I mean, who doesn't want to, right? I said, but somebody would have told you. How did you arrive at this? And she said, no, there is an audit finding for us. I said, that's a great start. But how much is quality worth for you? From data standpoint, it's very hard to put numbers. Actually, we can. Unlike even code, in data, we can actually put a monetary value to data and the data quality also. I told her, suppose you are 7 out of 10. and I can take you to 8 out of 10 in that whatever grading that you want to do. How much is it worth for you? And if you cannot answer that question, how much do you know that you can pay us? And she was a bit, I mean, taken aback. I mean, why is this guy arguing a project that's almost there, right, for them? So, in data, the quality, the way we measure it is far more rigorous. It's easier to measure in some ways. And then it's more around automation and tooling. Otherwise, we cannot scale. It's no way you can do manual testing like we do elsewhere. So,
Yep.
it's baked into both the roles as well as tools and frameworks that we use.
Raja, what's been your experience with trying to do the same?
Yeah, Sudhan talked about being old enough, and I'll tell you, I've been old enough to have started in a world where there was no separate QA. Developers used to do QA and used to do it by rotation across each other's projects, and we used to get back by finding more bugs in another person's code. It was fun. We, over the years, handed it off to separate QA, and I think somewhere I have also been through this journey of taking control back and taking QA and ownership of the product I build myself back. What we have noticed is for two particular clients that we recently worked, we realized the amount of rigor that you need to get automation strategy and automation framework and execution and infrastructure right actually requires the sort of development background and design skills that developers bring to the table. So this includes, Sultan talked about data quality. Well, I also talk about environment provisioning, right? Automated environment setup and automated environment decommissioning when test cases start or stop. I talk about integrating DDD into the day-to-day development cycle. I talk about using TDD. I talk about defining automation frameworks, multiple selection of tools. I talk about where to draw the boundaries between unit test, integration test, and systems test. So all of these things in both the projects that I encountered, I found I was very successful with having developers take much more ownership of not just writing their unit test, but also defining the overall framework and creating a level playing field. It was then easier for me to bring QAs on board to actually just apply business logic and apply data combinations to just extend the frameworks. So in my opinion, absolutely, I think ownership starts from home, and ownership starts from the developer's desk and the code the developer starts to write. And I have found very good success with that model. I'm trying on all new projects now.
So one question I would have, and I'll turn to Ravi here. So one of the things that Ravi we hear very often is that if you talk about getting the quality developed within the product itself, the very first statement you see, oh, it's not possible in a project that we have to deliver in 3 months, right? I mean, if we were doing something for 1 year, and then we'll not do it for the first release, we'll do it for the next release, and that first release never, I mean, that next release never comes. So what's your experience been in going through these kind of challenges, or if you will, excuses, or whatever situations we fall
Yeah,
in?
I mean, that's a great question, and I think the a lot of this comes into the visibility of what is important, in the sense that if we're only talking about the date as the metric, a lot of decisions are rallied around dates. And one of the things that we've created, and I think the engineering maturity framework that we have at Sapient, I think is pretty powerful. Ultimately, you're looking at, um, the quality, you have quality metrics, and as well as you have, timeline productivity metrics. And when you are talking to your clients in terms of all of those, for example, like we circulate dashboards to our clients, then they're looking at all of them in relationship to each other. So, and the other thing is showing the visibility of what is happening on the ground to the extent possible at all levels, including the client. So the point is that, they themselves don't want to get bad code or things that are not working. Obviously, there is a different, implication on the project leadership if things are going bad all the time. But the idea of saying that, the date is important, as well as the quality is important, and those metrics being measured at the same level and visible at the same level and talked about with the clients at the same level, I think plays a big part in the drivers to decision making. So I would think that that's one of the ways we, at least from our account perspective, try to raise the level of visibility over there.
No, fair, fair, and I'm very conscious of time. So I have one last thing that I wanted to ask and touch upon and kind of ponder upon. So before asking the question, I would start with my own personal experience. So one of the things that I saw, a very tactical example, had a team that was doing Java work, and I told them to create a test suite, right? And it was supposed to be created in WebDriver.io, which is incidentally the JavaScript as kind of flavor of Selenium. And what I saw is that the relative reluctance to learn a new tech stack, right? New language as such. And to be honest, a lot of the people in the Java world, the aha moment around event loop happened 3 years or 4 years after it happened to the JavaScript developers. So people, when they learned Webflux, were like, "Wow, when this is possible." And I think the JavaScript guys understood it 4 years back. So one of the things that I have made mandated for myself to start with, and for my teams and my developers and engineers, is that you should know at least more than one language, right? Because what Gaurav was talking about just in the previous call on paradigms of functional programming and reactive is stuff that may be slightly alien to people who have lived in the oops world for quite a bit, right? So what's your experience been? Because what I've seen is when we learn and get proficient on at least two languages, suddenly our ability to kind of cross those barriers, uh, of say DevOps technology, Terraform, Ansible, what have you, I have seen that reduce dramatically. So I'll start with maybe Raja, and then we'll go to Ravi and Sudha next.
Programming has been my passion, and I picked Java out of passion while my first project was really C++. When I started to learn Java, I started to hate C++ because it didn't offer automatic garbage collection, and I had to worry about which pointers were missing where. Honestly, I love learning new languages, and I learn it both in the context of work. So, for example, in our one of our clients, we were using Python a lot, both for writing new code, and we were also writing a lot of DevOps stuff in Python. So that gave me an opportunity to pick Python. Last 6 months, I'll tell you what all I've learned. And I'll keep the last one as that's the most exciting one I picked up once again after a while. So uh, I picked up Dart because I wanted to learn Flutter, and it was really amazing. I think Dart has been one of the best languages I've learned. It's really simple to learn and use. So it was a need of the hour also because many projects are now shifting from native to Flutter. And then I also picked up Swift because that was also the need of the hour to pick up some iOS programming. And then I also picked up a few other things. So JavaScript I used to hate, but when TypeScript came, I felt good about at least there being some sanity in the JavaScript world. So I picked that. Very recently, I've been working on trying to create my own language. Yes, and I still use Lex and Yak for those who remember from college days.
Wow.
I like. I don't. There are some things I don't like about some of these languages, so I'm trying to create a new one. So yeah, been fun.
Wow. Wow. Ravi?
Yeah, I mean, I would think, some languages are becoming more powerful than others, right? I mean, if you look at, even if you look at like, on AWS and GCP, and when they give examples, right, you have a Java example, you have a JavaScript example, you have a C sharp example, and you have and then, one or the other, if it's Go or, something, or a Python or something else, but they usually have three or four. And I think knowing one of those four, and I think probably knowing JavaScript is probably, I would think is almost essential. I would think, at this point. So I always encourage like someone who does not know JavaScript, Node.js, a type programming to definitely learn that, especially now. I believe for the next 2 3 years, it will still hold pretty strong. So that's usually my advice to go there and look at one of these four. And if you're not in these, then you have work to do.
So then,
So I don't have a language recommendation. In some ways, I'm like Raja. So I was just trying to reach and pick. I think I last count I know around 15 languages. So I just counting the book. So I have programming Rust, functional programming in Scala, the Go programming language. There is Prolog there. There's a Haskell in the across the room. So around 15, 16 languages is what I know. But I'll tell you one thing. So, what it requires to know a language, there is something that you learn faster by association, but it's also challenging in other ways. So, I bought my wife automatic just a month back, right? So I've been driving around helping her also get comfortable with it. When I got back into my car, I was struggling, right? I have the same challenges day in, day out when I program. So switching from Rust to Python to Scala, I mean, it takes me half an hour to get into the idiomatic programming of that language.
True.
But it's kind of some ways I find it, I don't know, kind of interesting for me that, okay, how do you change gears, right? If it's an automatic, you don't have to change. But then if you are in a manual mode, you have to change. You have to start thinking differently. For me personally, it's more satisfying and I feel happy doing it.
No, fair, fair. It's like back in school days, right? I mean, you read physics for a couple of hours and you read chemistry because you have to prepare for the exam. So it's pretty much like that kind of context switch. At least
But
that's the way I
that
do it.
is, I don't know whether I wanted to do all of them though. That's the difference.
A great conversation, guys. And I think the engineers listening on the call, there is something that all of us are going to take away. By the way, I'm itching to say that my next language is going to be Erlang that I'm itching to learn now, which is something that yeah. So I've just started, so really feeling great about it. Any questions on in the chat window for Sudan, Ravi, and Raja?
We have one from Shantanu. What's the importance of relevance of being full cycle developer versus a full stack developer?
Any of you? Let me take a stab at it to start with, and then obviously others can chime in. So these are definitely connected concepts, if you will, right? So for example, if you want to be a full cycle developer, you need to know right from the start of converting functional requirements into code, into quality scripts, and making sure you're able to deploy it, and if you are in a dev run model, also maintain it, right? So I think that is something that is really important, and I would say going forward for organizations like us would become table stakes. Beyond that, if you are becoming agnostic to the technologies in that full cycle journey of yours, that is what makes you full stack. That's the way I look at it, right? So both of them are equally essential for the kind of work that we are doing, uh, and they're complementary and connected concepts. So then, Raja, Ravi, you might want to.
I'll add from a value standpoint. So always, whenever I get into a team, I look for where the flow is breaking. So if I get into a team and I realize that there is a front end guy and there's a back end guy, and there I look at flow, and then the value is not getting to the clients, it's stuck because the UI guy has already done their work, but the back end guy has not created the stories. Then I know it's time for the front end guys to skill themselves a bit on the back end, right? And similarly, if I get into a team where I see that there's a DevOps guy designated whose responsibility is to kick off jobs or to troubleshoot jobs, and I find that the whole team is waiting for the build to come on the server, but it's not coming up because the only guy who knows it is stuck, then I know it's time for the rest of the team to learn a bit of DevOps. So the way I see it is, don't have a fixed mindset for learning one thing or the other. In your team, identify where the flow is breaking. Where is the bottleneck? What is it that who needs to know what, so that the flow is consistent and it gets delivered to the client as fast as possible, and just fill the gap, just learning any new thing is fun. Doesn't matter if you picked up testing, doesn't matter if you picked up a new language, doesn't matter if you picked up a new cloud platform. Learning any new stuff is fun. So just pick what you think is the most valuable in the context in which you're working.
Thanks, Raja. And in the interest of time, I think we'll have to wrap up. I'm getting calls from Vishal that we are over time. But thank you, gentlemen. It was always fun talking to you. I mean, if this was a beer conversation, we could have talked for the next 3 hours. But yeah, thank you so much.